Most people think there is nothing you can actually do when your photo gets used online without permission. In my opinion, that belief stops far too many people from taking any action at all, when in reality, there are real, legal steps that work more often than people expect. Today, I am not going to tell you to just report it and hope for the best. I want to walk you through an actual step-by-step plan, including the parts most advice leaves out. This video is about your own images and your own rights. It will not cover anything related to accessing accounts or content that does not belong to you. Welcome to Cyber Safety Brief, where we explain simple cybersecurity advice for everyday Americans. This video is based on authentic, legal, and publicly available cybersecurity information. Everything here is for awareness and protection only. Point 1. Why this happens more often than people realize. Let us start with why this problem is so common in the first place. What most people underestimate is how easily images spread once they are posted publicly, even on accounts set to what feels like a reasonably private audience. Screenshots, reposts, and simple right-click saves happen constantly, and once an image leaves your control, there is no technical way to fully undo that first copy. Here is a real-life type of example. Someone posts a personal photo on a public profile and months later discovers that same photo being used on a completely unrelated account. Sometimes for advertising, sometimes attached to a fake profile, sometimes just reposted without credit. In my opinion, this catches people off guard because it feels like such a personal violation, even when the person doing it may not have any malicious intent beyond simply not thinking about consent. What I personally think adds to the frustration here is realizing just how many ways a single photo can spread. It is not just about someone deliberately stealing it. Automated accounts that aggregate content, websites that scrape images in bulk, and even legitimate-looking services that repost popular content without checking ownership all contribute to how quickly a photo can end up somewhere you never intended it to be. Point 2. The first thing to do: document everything. Before reporting anything or reaching out to anyone, there is one step that matters more than people realize. What I personally think is the most commonly skipped step is documentation. Before you report the content or ask for it to be removed, take screenshots showing exactly where the photo appears, the account or website using it, and, if possible, the date and any visible engagement like comments or shares. Content sometimes gets deleted quickly once someone realizes they have been caught, and having proof matters if you need to escalate the situation later. A real-life type of scenario. Someone reports a photo being misused. The account deletes it before the platform even reviews the report, and without documentation, there is little way to prove what actually happened if the same account creates the issue again under a different name. The way I look at it, this single habit, documenting before you act, protects you if this ever becomes a repeated pattern rather than a one-time incident. What I personally think is worth adding here is that documentation should include more than just a single screenshot. Capture the account's profile page, the specific post or image, and, if possible, the account's username and any identifying details before you report anything. If the account gets removed or renamed after your report, this thorough documentation is often the only proof you will have that the situation happened at all, which matters if you need to reference it later, whether with the platform again or with anyone else involved. Point 3. Reporting through the platform's official process. Every major platform has a built-in process for reporting content that uses your image without permission, and these processes are far more effective than people assume when used correctly. What most people underestimate is how specific these reports need to be to get a fast response. A vague report saying, "This is my photo," tends to move slower than a report that clearly explains the situation, includes proof of ownership when possible, such as the original photo with matching metadata or an earlier posting date, and specifically references the platform's policy on unauthorized use of personal images. Here is a real-life type of example. Two people report similar unauthorized photo use. One report is vague and general. The other includes a clear explanation, a link to the original post showing the earlier timestamp, and a direct reference to the platform's relevant policy. In my opinion, the second report almost always moves faster, simply because it gives the review team everything they need without back and forth. What I personally think most people do not realize is that these reporting systems handle an enormous volume of submissions every single day, which means reports that require follow-up questions or additional clarification naturally get pushed further back in the queue. Writing your report clearly and completely the first time, even if it takes a few extra minutes, genuinely tends to produce a faster outcome than submitting something vague and hoping it gets sorted out through back-and-forth messages later. Let me know in the comments if you agree with this. Do you think platforms make this reporting process too complicated for the average person? Point 4. When the photo shows up outside social media. Sometimes the problem is not another social media account. It is a website entirely outside the platform where you originally posted. What I personally think surprises people most is that most search engines and website hosting providers also have their own reporting processes for unauthorized image use, separate from the original platform where the photo was posted. If a website refuses to remove your photo, you can often request that search engines remove the image from search results, which significantly reduces how easily people can find it, even if the original page technically still exists somewhere. A real-life type of scenario. Someone finds their photo being used on an unfamiliar website with no clear way to contact the site owner. In this case, going directly to the search engine's image removal request process is often the most realistic path forward, since it addresses visibility even when direct removal from the source is difficult or slow. What I personally think is a reasonable expectation to set here is that full removal from every possible source is not always realistic, especially with websites based outside your own country or operating with little accountability. In these cases, reducing visibility through search engine removal requests so the image does not show up when someone searches your name or related terms is often the most practical outcome you can achieve, even if the original file technically still exists somewhere. Point 5. When the situation involves impersonation or harassment. Sometimes a stolen photo is not just being misused randomly. It is being used to create a fake profile pretending to be you. In my opinion, this crosses into a more serious category because it is not just about a single image anymore. It is about someone actively misrepresenting your identity. Most platforms treat impersonation as a more urgent violation than general unauthorized image use, and reporting it specifically as impersonation rather than just a photo issue tends to get faster attention. What I personally think matters here is being specific in your report about what is actually happening. If someone is using your photo to pretend to be you, say that clearly, rather than simply reporting a photo issue. A real-life type of example. Someone discovers a fake account using their photos and their name, contacting their real friends and family. Reporting this as impersonation, along with screenshots as proof, tends to move through review processes faster than a generic photo complaint because platforms recognize impersonation as a direct safety risk to the people being contacted. The way I look at it, this distinction between unauthorized use and impersonation is one of the most important things to understand from this entire video. The exact same photo, used in two slightly different ways, can trigger completely different response times and review priorities depending on how you categorize your report when you submit it. Point 6. When platform reporting isn't enough. Sometimes, despite doing everything right, a report gets ignored or the response takes far longer than expected. What most people underestimate is that they are not out of options at that point. In serious or ongoing cases, especially those involving harassment or clear malicious intent, filing a report with local law enforcement is a legitimate next step, and having your earlier documentation ready makes that process significantly smoother. Many regions also have specific legal protections around the unauthorized use of someone's likeness or image, and consulting with a legal professional is a reasonable option for situations that continue despite your best efforts. I do not think this is about being paranoid. I think it is about being prepared and knowing that platform reporting is not always the final step, just usually the first and fastest one helps you avoid feeling stuck if that first step does not fully resolve things. What most people underestimate is how much documentation from earlier steps helps if you ever need to involve law enforcement or a legal professional. Having a clear timeline, screenshots, dates, and copies of your original reports to the platform gives whoever you speak with next a complete picture immediately, rather than having to reconstruct what happened from memory weeks or months after the fact. Point 7. Reducing the risk going forward. Once the immediate issue is handled, I think it is worth thinking about prevention without becoming overly restrictive about sharing your life online. The way I look at it, this is not about telling you to stop posting photos altogether. It is about being intentional, reviewing your account's privacy settings, understanding exactly who can see and save your posts, and being thoughtful about what you share publicly versus with a smaller trusted audience can meaningfully reduce how easily your images spread without your knowledge. What I personally think is a reasonable middle ground is periodically searching your own name and doing occasional reverse image searches on photos you post publicly and care about most. This will not catch everything, but it gives you a realistic sense of where your images are actually appearing. Point 8. Using reverse image search effectively. I want to spend a little more time on reverse image search specifically because, in my opinion, it is one of the most underused tools available to regular people, and most have never actually tried it. What most people underestimate is how simple this process actually is. Most major search engines let you upload an image or paste an image link directly into their search bar, and the results show you other places online where that same or a visually similar image has appeared. This is exactly how people often discover their photos being used somewhere they never expected, sometimes years after the photo was originally posted. A real-life type of scenario. Someone runs a reverse image search on a profile photo they have used for years, purely out of curiosity, and discovers it being used on an unrelated website they had never heard of. In my opinion, this kind of occasional check is not about being obsessive. It is simply a practical way to stay aware of your own digital footprint, the same way you might periodically check your credit report even when you have no specific reason to suspect a problem. Point 9. Reducing the risk going forward. What I personally think is a smart low-effort habit is doing this reverse search maybe once every few months on your most public photos, treating it the same way you might treat checking your credit report periodically. I would also like to know your opinion. Do you think people should be more cautious about what they post publicly, or do you think the responsibility should fall entirely on whoever misuses the image? Point 10. When the photo is tied to your work or business. I want to briefly address a version of this situation that carries slightly different stakes, and that is when a misused photo affects you professionally. What most people underestimate is how differently this feels when the photo is tied to your professional brand, like a headshot used on a business page, a portfolio image, or content connected to a small business you run. In these cases, the harm is not just personal. It can directly affect how potential clients or employers perceive you, especially if the image is used in a misleading or unflattering context. In my opinion, if the misuse involves your professional image specifically, it is worth mentioning that context clearly in your report, since some platforms treat business-related impersonation or misuse with a different level of urgency than a purely personal photo dispute. A real-life type of example. A freelancer discovers their professional headshot being used on a fake competing business page, misleading potential clients. Reporting this with clear reference to the professional and reputational harm involved, rather than framing it as a simple photo complaint, often results in a faster and more thorough review. If this video helps you understand online safety more clearly, like the video and subscribe to Cyber Safety Brief for more simple cybersecurity advice. Stay alert, stay informed, and stay safe online. Before you go, comment below if this has ever happened to you and what you ended up doing about it.